Harlem, 1935. Bumpy Johnson was 28 years old when burning crosses began to light up the street corners. The Ku Klux Klan had decided that the most vibrant black neighborhood in New York needed to be controlled, purified, silenced. The flames cast long shadows across tenement walls, smoke rising like prayers that would never be answered, and in those shadows something far more dangerous than fire began to take shape. First came the crosses burning on Lenox Avenue, wood crackling in the summer heat, white hoods gathered in circles like demons performing ancient rituals. Then the beatings started in broad daylight, hooded men dragging black workers from street corners while shopkeepers pulled down shutters and mothers yanked children inside. Finally came the lynching, a public execution meant to break whatever spirit remained. The body hung for 3 days before authorities cut it down, swaying in the wind like a grotesque flag claiming territory. Harlem trembled under the weight of organized terror, the kind that seeps into bones and makes strong men check over their shoulders before speaking above a whisper. The residents lowered their heads when white men passed, eyes fixed on cracked sidewalks, hands clenched in pockets. Police officers turned their faces away. Some even smiled, as if violence against black bodies was entertainment, a show they'd paid to see. Politicians pretended blindness, too busy counting campaign donations to notice the blood running in the gutters of the neighborhood that helped elect them. Harlem bled while New York looked the other way, the great city's conscience apparently sleeping through the massacre happening in its own backyard, deaf to screams that echoed through the night. Bumpy had grown up on these very streets, orphaned at 10 years old, raised by the gangsters who controlled the numbers racket and gambling dens. But unlike the others, he read Plato and Sun Tzu in stolen hours between collections, played chess with Jewish rabbis in Marcus Garvey Park, memorizing strategies that had nothing to do with street fighting and everything to do with war. He carried a code sacred as scripture. Protect Harlem above everything else, above money, above reputation, above his own life if necessary. The streets had raised him, and he would die before letting them burn. When Marcus, a 16-year-old kid who delivered newspapers and dreamed of becoming a doctor, got hospitalized after being beaten by hooded men until he lost vision in his left eye, something inside Bumpy fractured. It wasn't rage, not the hot kind that makes men act stupid and get themselves killed. It was decision, cold and calculated and final, the kind of certainty that comes when a man realizes talking time is over and action time has arrived. The boy would never see properly again, would never perform surgery, would carry that scar forever. Enough was enough. Time to end this. Bumpy spent 3 weeks investigating alone, moving through the city like smoke through a keyhole. He bribed white bartenders with expensive whiskey, bottles of bourbon that cost more than they made in a week, loosening tongues that revealed meeting locations and license plate numbers. He followed suspicious cars through Manhattan at night, staying far enough back to avoid detection, close enough to track destinations. He filled numbered notebooks with observations, connections, patterns emerging from chaos. He slept 3 hours a night, obsessed, methodical, tireless in the hunt, driven by something deeper than revenge, something closer to duty. Then he discovered the impossible, the thing that changed everything. The secret headquarters of the Klan in New York wasn't located in some poor southern backwater or working-class neighborhood. It was hidden inside a private club in Midtown Manhattan, on Fifth Avenue, frequented by bankers wearing gold watches, federal judges who decided the fate of thousands, newspaper owners who shaped public opinion. These were powerful men wearing hoods at night and Italian suits during the day, men who lunched with mayors and dined with senators, men who thought themselves untouchable, above consequences, protected by wealth and position and the color of their skin. The list Bumpy compiled over those 3 weeks seemed impossible. Names that read like a who's who of New York power. Judge Harold Morrison, Brooklyn Federal Court, the man who'd sentenced more black men to prison than anyone in state history. Robert Vandermeer, president of Manhattan Trust Bank, whose institution refused loans to black businesses as official policy. Thomas O'Malley, editor-in-chief of the Daily Chronicle, who published editorials calling for segregation backed by pseudoscience. Captain Richard Hayes, head of the 23rd Precinct, who openly laughed when Harlem residents filed complaints. These were men who commanded the city, shaped its laws, controlled its money, dictated its future. And now they were marked for death. Bumpy appeared alone at their weekly meeting, walking through the front door of that Fifth Avenue club like he owned the place. No visible weapons, no gang backing him up, no escape plan if things went wrong. Just him. One black man crossing the threshold of a mahogany-paneled room filled with 50 white supremacists who'd lynched people for less. The silence when he entered was deafening, the kind of shocked quiet that precedes either laughter or murder, every hooded head turning toward the doorway, hands instinctively reaching for concealed weapons. He walked to the center of the salon, his footsteps echoing on Italian marble that cost more than most Harlem families earned in a year. 50 hooded figures surrounded him in a tightening circle, creating a wall of white fabric and hatred. Bumpy spoke in a voice that was calm, almost polite, each word carefully measured and chosen, delivered like a professor giving a lecture rather than a condemned man begging for his life. "You have 10 days to disappear from Harlem," he said, letting the words settle like dust. "All of you, every single one." He paused, letting the ultimatum sink in, then continued with the same unsettling tranquility. "If after those 10 days I see a single hood, a single suspicious car, a single threat in my neighborhood." His eyes moved slowly across the room, memorizing every face visible beneath the white fabric, cataloging features for future reference. "There will be consequences that your families will feel for generations." The silence that followed was absolute, thick as fog. Then came the laughter, genuine amusement at what they considered an entertaining display of suicidal courage. Judge Morrison spat on the marble floor, the glob of saliva landing near Bumpy's worn shoes. Robert Vandermeer slammed his fist on a mahogany table, his face turning crimson beneath the eye holes of his hood. "Who the hell do you think you are, boy?" he shouted, voice echoing off expensive wallpaper. "We're going to hang you right next to that newspaper kid. Let you swing together." Bumpy didn't respond, didn't defend himself or make threats or show fear. He simply looked each man directly in the eyes, engraving every face into memory, then turned and walked out the same door he'd entered, footsteps steady, back straight, never once looking over his shoulder. A quick pause to ask for your support in our work. If you enjoy the incredible stories of Bumpy Johnson like we do, subscribe to our channel. An older man sitting in the corner, a great war veteran who'd seen real combat in French trenches and knew the difference between bravado and genuine danger, watched the entire exchange in silence. After Bumpy disappeared into the Manhattan night, he whispered to the men around him, voice carrying warning they wouldn't heed. "That man has real courage, the kind you don't see often. We should be afraid of him." The others laughed at him too, dismissed his concerns as paranoia from an old soldier who'd seen too much death and couldn't handle civilian life anymore. In the days that followed, the Klan intensified their attacks as a direct response, escalating violence to prove they couldn't be intimidated by a lone black man making threats. They firebombed 3 stores owned by black proprietors, flames lighting up Harlem for hours while fire trucks arrived late, moving slowly, taking their time. They beat Pastor Williams outside his church on Sunday morning, right in front of his congregation gathered for worship, elderly women screaming, children crying, everyone helpless to intervene. They distributed pamphlets throughout the neighborhood promising racial cleansing, detailed plans for removing black residents through violence and intimidation, making Harlem white again. The neighborhood boiled with fear and impotent rage, emotions with nowhere to go except inward. Mothers locked their children inside apartments during daylight hours, afraid to let them play in streets their grandparents had walked freely. Grown men cried alone in their rooms, ashamed of their inability to protect their families from organized terror. Store owners closed early and opened late, losing money they couldn't afford to lose. The community suffocated under the weight of systematic intimidation, every breath harder than the last. Nobody dared to fight back, didn't have the weapons or organization or protection to resist. Nobody except Bumpy, who counted down the days in silence, waiting with the patience of a man who'd already decided how this story would end. On the 10th day, nothing happened. The clan members celebrated at their private club, toasting with French champagne in crystal glasses that cost more than a week's salary in Harlem, convinced the threat had been empty talk from a frightened man trying to sound tough. Negros don't have real courage, they agreed, passing cigars and slapping backs. He didn't even show up, probably ran south with his tail between his legs. They laughed until midnight, drinking until they could barely stand, secure in their power and position, certain of their safety. On the 11th day, at precisely 7:34 in the morning, everything changed. Bumpy didn't attack with a gang or an army or guns blazing. He dressed in threadbare clothes borrowed from a delivery man, requested to borrow an old bicycle with a squeaky chain and worn tires, filled a cloth sack with day-old bread from a bakery willing to help. He transformed himself into something invisible, a ghost moving through the urban landscape. Just another poor black man doing menial labor that nobody with money and privilege would ever notice or remember. Nobody notices a Negro making deliveries in Manhattan. He becomes part of the scenery, ignored like fire hydrants and trash cans, transparent, non-threatening, beneath attention. Doormen hold doors open without looking at faces. Security guards wave him through without questions. White pedestrians step aside without making eye contact, moving around him like he's an obstacle rather than a person. And precisely because of this systematic invisibility, Bumpy became lethal. He was the perfect hunter, moving through enemy territory without anyone realizing the predator was among them. The first to fall was Robert Vandermeer, the banker who'd spat on the marble floor and called for Bumpy's lynching. Bumpy followed him for 3 full days, learning every movement, every habit, every predictable routine. One Tuesday morning, while Vandermeer stepped out of his black Cadillac in front of Manhattan Trust Bank, briefcase in hand, already thinking about the day's meetings, Bumpy pedaled slowly down Fifth Avenue and stopped right beside him. "Excuse me, sir," Bumpy said, offering a humble smile that played perfectly into every stereotype. "Could you give me directions to 42nd Street? I'm new to Manhattan, sir, and I'm lost." Vandermeer turned, irritated at being interrupted by hired help, ready to dismiss the question with a wave. He saw the face. Recognition flooded his eyes. The smile vanished. His mouth opened to scream. Bumpy executed him with surgical precision. 2 silenced shots to the chest that made sounds like books dropping. Professional and efficient and utterly cold. He pedaled calmly into the morning crowd. Just another delivery man going about his business, disappearing into the river of humanity flowing through Manhattan. Nobody saw the killing, not really. Witnesses interviewed by police described a Negro delivery man on a bicycle, a description that matched 50,000 men in the city, completely useless for identification purposes. The bicycle disappeared into an alley in Harlem, dismantled and scattered across 3 boroughs. The clothes went into an incinerator, reduced to ash within hours. When police canvassed the neighborhood that afternoon asking questions, Bumpy was home playing chess against himself, studying Sicilian defense variations. They walked right past him without a second glance, looking for someone suspicious, never imagining the killer could be the quiet man moving pawns across a board. The second was Thomas O'Malley, the newspaper editor who published articles defending segregation as scientific necessity, who wrote columns calling black people an inferior race that needed to be controlled for their own good and the safety of civilized society. Bumpy waited outside O'Malley's favorite Italian restaurant disguised as a shoeshine man, wooden box at his feet, brushes ready, playing the part perfectly. "Shine your shoes, sir?" he called out when O'Malley emerged, well-fed and satisfied. "Just 10 cents, sir, best shine in Manhattan." O'Malley kicked the shoeshine box hard enough to scatter brushes across the sidewalk, laughing at his own cruelty. "Your shoes look cleaner than mine, boy," he said, the kind of casual cruelty powerful men inflict without thinking twice. They were his last words. Bumpy stood up smoothly, the angle perfect, 3 quick shots that dropped O'Malley where he stood. The killer disappeared before the body finished falling, leaving only an abandoned shoeshine box with no fingerprints, no evidence, Nothing to connect the murder to anyone at all. The third was Captain Richard Hayes, the corrupt police officer who ignored every complaint filed from Harlem, who laughed openly when black mothers begged for protection for their children, who treated the neighborhood like an occupied territory where his men could do anything without consequences. Bumpy found him during his daily morning walk through Central Park, always at 6:15, always alone, always arrogant, always vulnerable without realizing it because he'd never imagined himself as prey. In 9 days, 9 men died, always in public spaces where they felt safest, always quickly, professionally executed, always without useful witnesses, just people who saw a Negro and looked away, training themselves not to see what their society told them didn't matter. Judge Morrison on his way into the courthouse, Dr. Phillips leaving the hospital, Reverend Thomas outside his church, each death perfectly executed, each body carrying a message that someone was settling accounts. New York descended into total panic, newspapers screaming about a phantom killer stalking the city's elite. The press screamed, "Serial killer in the heart of Manhattan," in fonts large enough to see from a block away. The police department assembled massive task forces, pulling detectives from every precinct, offering overtime and bonuses. The FBI sent special agents from Washington, men in dark suits with federal authority and unlimited resources. But nobody connected the dots, couldn't see the pattern hidden in plain sight, until Detective James Wright, the only black detective in the entire New York Police Department, began investigating quietly, keeping his findings from his superiors, trusting his instincts over official narratives. Wright discovered the impossible pattern by working nights and weekends, following leads nobody else considered important. All the victims frequented the same private club on Fifth Avenue. All had documented connections to the Ku Klux Klan, membership records and photographs Wright found buried in filing cabinets. All had been present the night a black man walked in alone and issued an ultimatum that was laughed away. The puzzle pieces fell into place, revealing a picture nobody in power wanted to see. When Wright brought his evidence to superior officers, expecting action and perhaps even praise for brilliant detective work, a suffocating silence filled the conference room. Some captains turned pale, blood draining from faces. One lieutenant stood abruptly and rushed out without explanation, looking like he might be sick. The commissioner locked the door with shaking hands and leaned close to Wright, voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to bury this investigation, right now, for your own good." Wright refused, understanding what acceptance would mean. He took everything to the New York Times instead, walked into their offices with a folder thick with proof. The resulting explosion went national within hours. The truth printed in newspapers destroyed New York's carefully maintained image. Secret Klan members included Judge Harold Morrison, who'd sent hundreds of black men to prison, real estate magnate Robert Vandermeer, who'd shaped the city's housing segregation policies, 3 high-ranking police officers, 2 state politicians with federal ambitions, all systematically eliminated by a phantom assassin who moved through the city invisible. The metropolis split down the middle. Some demanded justice and swift capture of the killer. Others whispered in bars and living rooms that maybe, just maybe, they deserved exactly what happened to them. The FBI raided the Fifth Avenue Club with warrants and battering rams, finding evidence that surpassed everyone's worst fears. Meticulously maintained membership records listing 200 names from New York's power structure, compromising photographs of secret meetings showing faces everyone recognized, internal documents planning systematic racial cleansing of multiple neighborhoods, financial records showing donations to Klan operations across the country. Dozens of powerful men were exposed and arrested in coordinated dawn raids. The scandal destroyed careers, bankrupted families, shattered fortunes built over generations. New York would never be the same city again. Bumpy Johnson was arrested 3 weeks after the last killing, captured without drama or fanfare. He didn't run, didn't resist, didn't try to shoot his way out like gangsters in movies. When police officers entered his apartment with guns drawn and arrest warrants in hand, they found him sitting calmly at a table, playing chess against himself, pieces positioned in the middle of a complex endgame. "I knew you would come eventually," he said, voice level. No fear or regret. I just needed enough time to finish the work that needed doing. Mission accomplished. I'm ready now. During the trial that followed, something extraordinary happened that nobody expected. A development that changed the entire proceedings. Witnesses from Harlem packed the courtroom day after day, standing in hallways when seats filled up. Mothers holding children, pastors in their Sunday best, store owners who closed shops to attend, factory workers taking unpaid days off. None testified against Bumpy Johnson. Some lied shamelessly on the stand, providing alibis that were physically impossible, claiming they'd been playing cards with him on nights when murders occurred miles away. Others developed sudden amnesia, couldn't remember seeing anything despite being present. The prosecutor fought desperately, but his evidence was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon, no eyewitnesses who would cooperate, nothing concrete enough to guarantee conviction. In the end, Bumpy was sentenced to only 5 years for illegal weapons possession, a victory that felt like acquittal. On the day of sentencing, as court officers led him away in handcuffs, Bumpy turned to face the packed courtroom one final time. He didn't smile or wave or make dramatic gestures. He simply stood there, letting his gaze move across the sea of black faces who'd come to witness this moment, connecting with each person who'd shown up, acknowledging their presence. Then he nodded once, a small gesture of recognition and respect, and allowed himself to be led away. The courtroom erupted in applause that judges couldn't silence, clapping that echoed through marble hallways, a sound that said everything words couldn't express about what Bumpy Johnson meant to Harlem, about what he'd sacrificed, about the terror he'd ended with his own hands when nobody else would. The burning crosses never returned to Harlem after that. The Klan tried once more, 6 months after Bumpy's incarceration, sending 3 hooded men to Lenox Avenue to test whether the neighborhood would submit without their protector. They were found 3 days later in an alley, beaten so severely that police couldn't immediately identify the bodies, a message delivered by a community that had learned from Bumpy's example. The hoods were stuffed in their mouths. After that, white supremacists stayed out of Harlem entirely, understanding finally that this was territory they couldn't claim, a place where resistance lived and breathed and would never surrender. 5 years later, when Bumpy walked out of prison, Harlem threw him a welcome that looked more like a hero's return than a criminal's release. Thousands lined the streets, banners hanging from windows, children perched on parents' shoulders to catch a glimpse. Store owners provided free food. Musicians played jazz until dawn. The neighborhood celebrated not just a man, but what he represented. The refusal to accept terror as normal, the willingness to risk everything for community, the demonstration that even in systems designed to crush black resistance, one person willing to act could change everything. Bumpy returned to his apartment, to his chess set and his books, to the quiet life he'd lived before deciding 9 men needed to die. He never spoke publicly about those 9 days, never confirmed or denied involvement, never apologized or justified his actions. When reporters asked, he simply said, "Harlem takes care of its own. Always has, always will." Then he'd return to his chess games, moving pieces with the same calculated precision he'd once used to move through Manhattan, a phantom who'd become legend, a reminder that monsters sometimes need to be hunted by men willing to become monsters themselves, even if only temporarily, even if it costs them everything. The children who grew up in Harlem after 1935 never saw burning crosses, never experienced the organized terror their parents remembered. They walked streets their ancestors couldn't walk safely, attended schools that had been closed to them, built businesses in neighborhoods that had tried to push them out. When they asked their grandparents why Harlem was different from other black neighborhoods, why they felt safer here than anywhere else, the elders would tell stories about Bumpy Johnson, about the man who went to war alone and won, about 9 days that changed everything, about the price one person paid so thousands could live without fear. And on quiet nights when violence threatened to return, when hate tried to take root again, someone would whisper the warning that had become legend. "This is Bumpy's Harlem, and ghosts remember." The threat usually disappeared before morning, because some lessons once taught with sufficient brutality and precision never need to be repeated. The phantom had long since become memory, but memory itself had become protection, a shield forged from one man's willingness to become exactly what his enemies feared most. The reckoning they'd always known was coming, but had convinced themselves would never arrive. If you enjoyed our content, consider clicking the button. New exclusive stories every day.